All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today's video is part of the ongoing effort to expand the public archive, which you can check out at brozime.com. I'm developing the public archive to be an all-in-one, easy-to-use guide for new and returning Warframe players. If you'd like to get early access to the project notes in progress, or to provide feedback or new ideas for the public archive, you can become a member on Patreon, or additionally, subscribe on Twitch. Thanks so much to all of my current subs and patrons for supporting the project. Now let's jump into the video. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sorry, it's been a little while. I was out on a trip and went to TwitchCon and stuff and got sick, so I've been away for a little while, and you might be able to still hear that a little bit. But what we did since I have been back is that I have finished the full chart of what my recommendations are for shards for all Warframes. So if you wanted to know what I would suggest on any given Warframe, that is now available with this chart over on the main website. So this is pretty simple. There's not anything too crazy here. I have notes on the Warframes that need notes, and otherwise this is just telling you what I would use on any given Warframe for their Archon Shards, and then like some reasoning if I feel like it's honestly needed. But yeah, so this is like very simple to read. R5, you can just look at the chart here, but it's just the order they appear in game. R5 is duration, R4 is strength, for example. Then you have like your Y4, which is casting speed. Everything's all laid out here, and then we have this nice Google sheet for you to be able to just look at. And I wanted to talk about like what this kind of tells us, and it should be pretty obvious just from looking at it what this tells us. And that is that, hoo boy, do blue shards need a buff. There are 250 different shard possibilities because, of course, 50 Warframes, 5 shards each, so on and so forth. And of those 250, I think that there are 194 of those slots that want to be red shards, which is, let's call that an overwhelming majority. And then only 36 slots that want to be yellow shards, which is mostly casting speed, although there is a good bit of parkour speed in there. The other slots don't really rate outside of some niche scenarios. So a lot of casting speed, a lot of parkour speed, and there is, I will say, probably at least like minimum, I would say, like a 20 shard wiggle room probably for yellow's favor, just for people choosing to either have more casting speed or to go for like parkour shards as well. So it's probably a little bit more fair to say that in general it's probably about 170 red and probably about like 50 to 60 yellow. But blues are really struggling. They definitely see use in a couple spots. I've got some on Excalibur because he really likes the energy max, and Garuda uses 1 for an interaction with her 3. And then for Inaros, honestly, Inaros is 5 of these. He is just like all armor. But that's only if you want to go for survivability and don't need to build for a stat on Inaros for like any given different helmet. That would be more convenient for you. So these shards, and also because like Inaros is like, you know, not a particularly favored Warframe. If you're going to be going for a tank Warframe right now, I think that Revenant and Nezha are both much better options. So like a lot of like where you'll see the blue shards is they're going to be useful on certain frames who really care about the energy max and like are able to drop Prime Flow pretty easily and put other things in their build, or don't use Prime Flow and really wish they had a little bit of that stat. But other than that, I'm pretty generous with where I've used the blue shards just in general. For example, on Rhino uses them for the parasitic armor build. If you don't do the parasitic armor build, he uses all strength shards just like a lot of other Warframes. And for Saren uses a mix of the HP and armor for Tank Saren. Tank Saren being like not being able to die because of Gloom being on while your 1 deals damage. And Tank Saren, I think, is like pretty optimal for most players and what they're going to want to be doing, because there's not really a good reason to increase the strength on Saren because she kills things anyway, and you actually run the risk of killing enemies too fast if you just go and, like, you know, dump an extra 75% strength on her with Tau shards. She's going to end up in a situation where she's not very useful at, like, you know, ESO, because the enemies die too fast and you have to reset too often, and it actually becomes worse that way. So where I've put the blue shards, I think, is like generally pretty generous, and it's still only 20, which is super tough. I do think that like this chart could be very, very different with like very minor changes. The main one being that like I really feel that blue shards in particular, these stats either need to be higher or alternatively, and I don't think energy max really needs to be higher. I just think that that's like more of a bit of a niche stat. And also prime flow is so good that you can't really get the full equivalent of it from this. So maybe this being higher actually could affect that more, making it easier to replace prime flow on a lot of frames that get a ton of energy from that and really appreciate it. But these, like, so health, shield capacity, and armor, I mused that it would be like insane if these were base stat additions, where this could be like affected by vitality and stuff like that. But legitimately, I think that without that, these stats kind of don't have real relevancy for like almost any Warframe. And that's tough because if it did affect those base stats, I think these would be super desirable and like well used on people who just want to turn a Warframe into a tank, at least for the regular star chart. And if you went like all in on like Tau shards and these affected base stats, you could probably make some justifications around like using Umbral Vitality on a Warframe that wouldn't before, where it's like, well, if I add 2 of these blue shards and get 300 more base health, then suddenly Umbral Vitality is kicking me up into like that, like, you know, 1600, 1700 health range. And you're getting way, way more out of it at that point. And you can also kind of like count that Umbral Vitality as like 11% strength. So on frames that have a little bit of wiggle room, maybe you add a couple of strength shards to be like basically a an augur strength. Then you switch to Umbral Vitality, which is giving you like 11% strength because of Umbral Intensifies increase. And then you're kind of offsetting that and creating like a Warframe that's a tank that wouldn't otherwise be. But right now, just adding, even if these are Tau Forged, say you add like 2 Tau Forged shards, just adding on a 450 health, really doesn't move the needle on like what you're like really doing there. And Umbral Vitality on those frames that have those really low health values, it's pretty whatever. You're gonna have like not even 1,000 health in a lot of cases, which is just really not very like doable. Well, I guess you'll have like at least like around 1,000, but it's not going to be a big enough chunk for you to like actually go for that, I think. And that's the tough part. I think that the Azure shards are like just pretty objectively they're the least desirable, and we all knew that. So I think it'd be interesting if they were buffed up a little bit to try and give them more of a chance. And I think it would be really interesting, even if DE did it as just like an experiment. I think it would be just a super interesting experiment, plain and simple, to be like, what does happen if you make them base stats? Like, just like put the change into the game and be like, this is experimental and we might revert it if it is like stupid, right? If it's like absolutely ridiculous, just like mega dummy, and everyone's only using blue shards now, then like it would be revertible. But like I do think it would be a really interesting just experiment to be like, let's just put it out there. Let's make it base stats. We're going to see like if that makes people start using Vitality, if it makes you put redirection on a bunch of frames that you wouldn't otherwise. Like, for example, I think like one of the main ones that would be a pretty obvious change is that it would suddenly just be so worth it. I missed it. So worth it to run shield shards on Hildren. Like right now, Hildren runs a mix of duration and strength, I would say, because that strength lets her hit certain thresholds, and then the duration is also just generally helpful for her. But if you're getting base shields, she's a frame that's already running redirection and stuff, so like getting that number pumped even up like further is great for her. And I think that would be like an interesting place where like we would definitely probably see people run a lot more blues on her, and maybe not all the time, because I still think that this setup would be, you know, it would have value. But that like extra tankiness would be a thing that some people would value, because you'd be getting like a real, actual good chunk of tankiness out of it. And honestly, like frames like Garuda, right, where like she is basically using this extra strength, like I put in this note here, to play around more with her augments and like use like the reload augment and stuff. But if you would like want to decide against that, you could turn Garuda into a very real tank. Like you could unironically very much go for, oh well, I'm going to put Umbral Vitality and the Umbral Armor mod in there, have 2 blue shards on HP, have 2 blue shards on armor, and I'm going to turn Garuda into a health tank. Like you could unironically do that and be like, even though you're using like your percentage, like conversion into your energy whenever you need it, you'd be able to heal enough that you'd have a very high ceiling for that, and it could make you like a different play style with Garuda that you might not otherwise get. But yeah, it's interesting to think about like what would happen if those blue shards were base stats. And like I don't think that's going to happen because like I asked the question basically that were like honestly right around launch for the Archon Shards about whether or not they were going to be base stats, and it like Pablo was, you know, the reaction was that it was like pretty ridiculous, and I think that that is true, that it's pretty ridiculous, but also I think it'd be interesting to try and maybe balance this out a little bit, because this is pretty ridiculous, and also the like ratio of how many of them are just R4s and R5s of these 194 is like rough. It's real rough. It is legitimately these 5 on Baruch, which is for funny number, and you could also just run strength if you wanted to, because they're not that different, but the crit damage is hysterical. These 5 on Baruch are, I think, all of them that are red and are not an R4 or R5. I think that's all of them, because I don't see any value in running like the stat on Mesa or anything like some people might see some amount of value in. I think the strength is just better there, or the duration rather is just better there. So I think it's just those 5, which means 189 of these red shards are concentrated in 2 choices, which is tough out there. Which is definitely tough out there. Yeah, I wonder if they're going to make any other changes to the Archon Shard system to maybe make it so that this isn't as much the case, because I think that, like, you know, people only wanting red shards is tough. And I think the yellow shards do have like a good, like very good case to be used for like some of their utility stuff, because I think some frames will definitely want that, and some people will want that just like over the strength, honestly, in a lot of cases. But yeah, I wonder if they'll buff the yellow and blue shards to maybe make them a bit more desirable. And for the yellow shards, that's kind of tough, although I think like just increasing the number on like the orb effectiveness for energy, that could actually go a long way with making people more likely to use that to replace energize. But the blue shards, I don't really see getting where they probably need to go without these numbers being increased either rather significantly, or probably the healthier option to be those base stats. Because if they are base stats, like these just being higher doesn't change how you're gonna mod. And I think them being base stats would be healthier, because it could be the same stats, but those stats would be much more important if you're going in that direction. And it also is much funnier for Inaros, which is kind of like a non-factor. Inaros is already a silly bag of health anyway. But yeah, that's what's up. Check it out. The link should be in the description to the site for the Archon Shards, which then, of course, links to our big chart here. If you want to see all the options that I picked out for everybody. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments and everything. Good to be back. Sorry if I sound a little sick once again. But I will see you tomorrow or tonight on stream. Go check it out at twitch.tv/Brozime if you're just hanging out. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you to all of the new patrons and returning patrons, and especially thank you to our $10 plus patrons, which are Aiden Neon, rather, Brutus Salazar, Donald Stevens, Dylan Dworsky, Thrain, Jacob Bean, JC for Science, Joshua Adams, Lou Zanth, Malik X. Williams, Petruzanka, Mitchta, Nicholas Ridley, Paradise, Shan Hardine, Victor, Zach Zahner, Aaron Vanderbroek, and all of our $5 patrons, and also the $2 patrons that we have. But yeah, things should be good this month. We just got the announcement that there's not going to be any echoes of the Zaramon happening, or echoes of the most recent update, rather. So there's going to be time to fill in a lot of old guides for Warframe, which is awesome. Should expand the site and be great. Thank you so much for everyone's support on Patreon. I really appreciate it.